At the Thanksgiving table, I didn't flip the roast turkey. I just watched my brother Brandon hold the bank envelope I had handed him. Inside was a cashier's check for $6,000. It was every cent of my overtime pay from the last 6 months meant to clear his legal fees and debt. He looked around the table and sneered. She thinks buying us off makes up for her being impossible to love. My parents laughed. My father actually raised his glass to toast Brandon's resilience. That was the moment my anxiety finally died. I reached over, pulled the check out of his hand and whispered one word, understood. Then I turned around and walked out into the cold air. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from right now. I want to see who's standing with us today. I sat in the driver's seat of my Corolla, the engine idling, the heater blasting against my frozen hands. I wasn't crying, I was vibrating. It was that specific electric shake that happens when your body is flooded with adrenaline but has nowhere to put it. I looked at the dashboard clock. 6:14 p.m. 12 minutes. That's how long I had lasted inside. 12 minutes to undo 29 years of conditioning. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen was bright in the dark cab. I opened my banking app, navigated to check services and typed in the check number. Amount $6,000. Reason for stop payment theft. I hovered my thumb over the confirm button. That $6,000 wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was 6 months of 60-hour weeks. It was missing Ethan's birthday dinner because I had to close a deal in a different time zone. It was the migraines that started on Sunday nights and didn't leave until Friday evenings. I had converted my stress into currency, wrapped it in a bank envelope and laid it at their feet as an offering, and they had stepped on it. I thought about the dining room table they were still sitting at. I paid for that table. I paid for the chairs Brandon was leaning back in. I paid for the roast they were eating. I had literally built the stage for my own humiliation. I pressed confirm. The app loaded for a second, then flashed a green check mark. Request processed. Just like that, the money was mine again. I leaned my head back against the headrest and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 12 years old. People always ask why we stay. Why we keep giving to people who only know how to take. Why I wrote that check in the first place when I knew deep down that Brandon would never pay me back, and my parents would never say thank you. It's because growing up in my house was like playing a rigged slot machine. You put your coins in your grades, your obedience, your money, and you pull the lever. 99 times out of 100 you get nothing. You get silence. You get criticism. You get told you're too sensitive. But that one time in a 103 Cherries lineup, my dad would say, "Good job, ally." Or my mom would hug me without critiquing my outfit. That tiny intermittent hit of dopamine was enough to keep me standing at the machine, feeding it everything I had, convinced that if I just paid a little more, I'd hit the jackpot of unconditional love. I looked at the house one last time. The warm yellow light glowing from the dining room window looked inviting from here. It looked like a family, but I knew the truth. That house wasn't a home, it was a casino, and the house always wins. I put the car in gear and backed out of the driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt I had been trained to expect. Instead, I felt lighter. The slot machine was unplugged. I was keeping my coins. And for the first time in my life, I was driving away from the noise, heading toward a silence that belonged entirely to me. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, my phone was vibrating so constantly, it felt like a living thing trying to escape my pocket. I set it on the counter face up and watched the notifications roll in. It was a fascinating case study in narcissism. My mother Stacy led the charge. Her texts weren't sentences, they were walls of guilt. "You ruined Thanksgiving. I can't believe you would be so transactional with family. Your father is devastated." Then came Brandon. He didn't text me directly. He took his grievances to the court of public opinion, a vague Instagram story about toxic people who weaponize money against those they claim to love, complete with a black background and a sad emoji. I poured a glass of water and drank it, standing up just watching the screen light up. I scrolled through the barrage looking for 3 specific words. "Are you okay?" I looked for "Why did you leave?" or "Let's talk." I scanned every message, every missed call notification. They weren't there. Not once in 57 notifications, not a single person asked about me. They only asked about the check. They were frantic, not because they had lost a daughter, but because they had lost a sponsor. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and went to sleep. The noise lasted for 3 days, then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. It filled my apartment like a gas leak. November bled into December and the phone stayed dark. At first, the quiet hurt more than the shouting. I found myself checking the screen, waiting for the apology I knew I deserved, or at least a fresh wave of anger to prove I still mattered enough to be hated. I paced my living room, wondering if I should reach out, wondering if I had been too harsh. The conditioning runs deep, the silence felt like a punishment, a timeout they were putting me in until I learned my lesson and opened my wallet again. But then clarity hit me. It arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee, staring at the empty digital space where their demands used to be. They weren't giving me the silent treatment. They weren't stewing in emotional agony over our estranged relationship. They just didn't call because the service I provided had been terminated. It is the logic of appliances. When your toaster breaks, you don't sit by it and wonder how it's feeling. You don't leave it angry voicemails asking why it betrayed you. You might jiggle the cord, maybe give it a smack, but once you realize it won't make toast anymore, you walk away. You don't miss the toaster's personality, you miss the toast. For 29 years I thought I was a member of a family. In that silence I realized I was just a utility. I was the Wi-Fi router, the electricity, the credit limit. Now that the payment had been stopped, I was offline, and you. Don't talk to offline equipment. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness of the roast tasted sharp and clean. The hurt began to crystallize into something colder, harder, and infinitely more useful. I wasn't waiting for them to miss me anymore. I realized they never would. They were just waiting for the next time they needed to turn the power back on. I decided right then that when they finally reached for the switch, they would find the breaker had been permanently cut. January arrived with a grey, relentless drizzle that matched the mood inside my head. The silence I had cultivated was broken on a Tuesday afternoon by a single vibration on my desk. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a Happy New Year. It was a link. Brandon had sent me a URL for a high-ticket drop shipping master class. The price tag was $2,500. Beneath the link he added a casual assumption-heavy text. Need this for the portfolio. Dad said you'd handle it. I stared at the message. The audacity was so pure it was almost impressive. After months of silence, after the holiday blout, they truly believed the reset button had been hit. They thought the service outage was over and billing could resume as normal. Dad had triangulated the request, sending Brandon to do the dirty work, assuming I would fold under the pressure of a business investment. I didn't feel the old panic. I didn't feel the urge to explain that I had rent to pay or that I was still recovering from the financial hit of the table renovation. I felt nothing but a cold administrative efficiency. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the transfer tab and selected Brandon's contact. For the amount, I typed in a 0, a decimal point, and a 1 cent. In the memo line where I usually wrote things like good luck or love you, I typed 5 words: insufficient funds. I hit send. The confirmation screen flashed, transfer complete. It was the most satisfying transaction of my life, but I wasn't done. That single penny was the first domino. I realized that while I had stopped the direct cash flow, I was still subsidizing their lives in invisible ways. I opened a new tab on my laptop and logged into Netflix. There they were, 5 profiles staring back at me. Mom's shows, Dave's action movies, Brandon. I was paying $18 a month so they could ignore me in high definition. I clicked Manage Profiles. I didn't hesitate. I deleted Brandon first, then Dad, then Mom. I changed the password to a random string of alphanumeric chaos, logged out of all devices, and watched the screen revert to a single profile, mine. Next was Spotify. I dissolved the family plan, then the Uber Eats family profile where I saw a pending charge for Brandon's lunch from yesterday, a $20 burger I hadn't authorized. I disputed the charge and removed his access. It took 45 minutes to scrub my digital existence clean of them. By the time I finished, my phone had buzzed 3 times with incorrect password notifications. I didn't answer. I didn't send a follow-up text, explaining why their screens had gone black. I simply closed my laptop. The silence in the apartment felt different now. It wasn't the heavy silence of waiting for a call. It was the clean, sterile silence of a vacating tenant. I had evicted them from my life, one subscription at a time. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sharing my bandwidth with anyone. March arrived with a deceptive calm. The silence from my family had stretched into a fragile peace. But on a Tuesday evening, my phone shattered it. It was my father. He hadn't called since the Thanksgiving walkout. When I answered, his voice wasn't angry, it was broken. It was a performance calibrated to bypass every defense mechanism I had built over the last 4 months. Allison, it's your mother, he choked out. She didn't want me to call you. It's bad. My stomach dropped. The conditioning is instant. You can't reprogram 30 years of survival instincts in a few months. What happened? I asked, my voice betraying the steel I thought I had forged. He spun a terrifying narrative, a specialist, a degenerative condition they had been hiding to protect me. a procedure that had to happen now to prevent permanent mobility loss. And then the kicker, the insurance had denied the claim because it was deemed experimental. They needed $18,500 by Friday to secure the surgical slot. I don't have it, ally. He wept, actually wept. I'm looking at her right now and she's in so much pain. I don't know what to do, I'm failing her. The fixer in me roared to life. This wasn't a credit card bill or a gaming PC. This was my mother's health. The logic of appliances didn't apply here. You don't throw out a toaster if it can be fixed. You fix it. I felt the familiar itch to open my laptop to liquidate my emergency fund to be the hero one last time. I told him I needed an hour to move funds around. He thanked me, his voice thick with relief, and hung up. I was already logging into my brokerage account when Ethan put a hand on my wrist. He didn't look frantic, he looked skeptical. Can we just verify the doctor? He asked quietly. 18 grand is a lot, let's just call the hospital billing department and pay them directly. I froze. Of course, that was the logical move, but my father hadn't given me a doctor's name. He hadn't sent an invoice. He had just given me a routing number for his personal checking account. A cold prickle of suspicion started at the base of my neck. I don't have the doctor's name, I whispered. But I have Mom's email password. I had set up her iPad 3 years ago. I knew she used the same password for everything brand in 1999. I opened a new incognito window. I typed in her Gmail address. I entered the password. It worked. I was in. I went to the search bar. I typed medical hospital surgery insurance. Nothing, no urgent denials, no correspondence with specialists, just newsletters and spam. The panic in my chest began to transmute into something sharper. I cleared the search bar and looked at the trash folder, thinking maybe they deleted the bad news. Nothing there. Then I saw it. A confirmation email from 3 days ago sitting in the promotions tab, unread by me but clearly flagged by her. Subject: confirmation for David and Stacy's 35th anniversary voyage. I clicked it. It wasn't a hospital bill. It was a booking confirmation from Royal Caribbean. The owner's suite on a 14-day Mediterranean cruise departing in April. All-inclusive drink package, private balcony, butler service. I scrolled down to the total, $18,450. I stared at the number. It was almost exactly what my father had just begged for. There was no surgery, there was no degenerative condition. There was only a luxury vacation they couldn't afford and a daughter they viewed as an insurance policy against their own entitlement. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I felt a sudden violent clarity. The nausea vanished, replaced by the icy calm of a coroner determining the cause of death. My parents weren't just toxic, they were predators. They were willing to leverage my fear of my mother's mortality to upgrade their lifestyle. I printed the itinerary. The sound of the printer warring to life was the only noise in the room. I watched the paper slide out warm and crisp. This wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. I drove to Ethan's parents' house with the print out of the Royal Caribbean itinerary, burning a hole in my purse. I felt contaminated. Discovering the depth of my parents' deception made me feel like I was covered in something oily and impossible to wash off. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to compose a face that didn't look like it had just stared into the abyss. Walking into Paul and Susan's house was disorienting. My body was braced for impact, shoulders up, jaw tight, waiting for the passive-aggressive comment about my arrival time or the subtle dig about my job. But when I opened the door, there was only the smell of roast chicken and the low hum of a baseball game on the radio. Susan looked up from the stove and smiled. "Hey sweetie, there's wine on the counter, help yourself." That was it. No demands, no guilt trips, no performance. We sat down to eat. The conversation was painfully, beautifully mundane. They talked about the neighbor's dog. They talked about a new recipe for potato salad. In my house, dinner conversation was a minefield where you navigated around Dad's ego and Mom's martyrdom. Here it was just talking. They were going to let me liquidate my savings for a balcony suite and an unlimited drink package. After dinner, I offered to clear the table. Susan waved me off. "Sit, you look exhausted." I went out to the front porch to get some air. The quiet of the suburbs felt heavy. Ethan's dad, Paul, came out a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag. He leaned against the railing, looking out at my car in the driveway. "By the way," he said, his voice low and growly, "I noticed your rear passenger tire was looking a little soft when you pulled in. I grabbed the compressor from the garage and topped it off for you. You might want to check for a slow leak later, but you're good to get home." I froze. My brain frantically tried to calculate the cost. What did I owe him? What did he want? Was this a leverage play? I waited for the follow-up, the lecture on car maintenance, the sigh of inconvenience, the expectation of praise. but Paul just turned around and went back inside to finish the dishes. I stood there in the dark, and for the first time in 4 months I started to cry. It wasn't a sob, it was a silent shaking release. This was the architecture of peace. Real love isn't a grand gesture or a rescue mission, it isn't a slot machine you have to feed. It's someone noticing your tire is low and fixing it without asking for credit. It is boring, it is quiet, it is safe. I looked at my car, then back at the house where the people inside didn't want anything from me but my company. The contrast broke me open. Parents didn't just steal my money. They stole the idea that I was worthy of care without a price tag. I wiped my face. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I touched the printout in my bag. I wasn't just going to confront them for the money. I was going to confront them for the tires. I was going to show them that I finally knew the difference between a family and a parasite. 2 days later, my father called. He was frantic. He said the surgeon had moved up the consultation window and they were coming over to pick up the check. They didn't ask if I was home. They didn't ask if I had the money. They just announced their arrival time like a scheduled delivery. At 7:00 p.m. the buzzer rang. I buzzed them in. I opened my apartment door and stood in the frame. My parents, David and Stacy, stood there looking genuinely beleaguered. My mother was leaning on my father, playing up the frailty. Brandon stood behind them, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. Masterpiece of manipulation. Oh, Ally, my mother sighed, clutching her chest. Thank you for doing this, you're saving my life. Where's the money? Brandon asked, not looking up. Come in, I said. They walked into my living room. They didn't notice that all the photos of them were gone from the shelves. They didn't notice the boxes packed by the door. They only noticed the large, thick envelope sitting on the coffee table. Is that it? My father asked, reaching for it. Yes, I said. Open it. He tore the envelope open with trembling hands. I watched his face. I watched the anticipation curdle into confusion and then into pure unadulterated horror. He pulled out the stack of papers. The logo for Royal Caribbean was bright blue at the top. The itinerary was printed in high resolution. The non-refundable deposit line was highlighted in neon yellow. What is this? My mother whispered, dropping her frail act instantly. It's the surgery, I said, my voice calm and level. 14 days of intensive care in the owner's suite. All-inclusive drink package included. I hear the Mediterranean sea air does wonders for degenerative moral bankruptcy. The room went dead silent. Brandon looked up from his phone, eyes wide. Wait, you guys booked a cruise? We can explain. My father stammered, his face flushing a deep guilty red. We needed a break. The stress. Your mother really is sick. Ally, the cruise was just therapy. Therapy, I repeated. $18,000 of therapy paid for by your daughter's panic. You don't understand, my mother shrieked suddenly, full of energy. We sacrificed everything for you. We deserve this. Do you want me to suffer? I don't want you to suffer, I said. I just don't want to pay for it anymore. I walked over to the door and opened it wide. The hallway light spilled and harsh and unforgiving. Get out, I said. You can't do this, my father growled, stepping toward me. You promised. We already put the deposit down on a credit card. If we don't pay off, the interest will kill us. Then I guess you better start swimming. I said. I hope the buffet is worth losing your daughter. Bon voyage. My father stopped. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time he didn't see a resource. He saw a wall. He grabbed my mother's arm and dragged her out. Brandon followed, muttering something about crazy. I slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't empty. It was full. I walked out to my balcony and looked at the city lights. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my bank. Interest payment received plus $42.15. My savings account was still intact. It was growing. It was mine. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. I had lost a family, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained the rest of my life. If you've ever had to buy your own peace of mind, share this story. You are not a bank and you are not impossible to. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story. Share this story. You are not alone. God bless you. Thanks for watching.